Oh, hey,
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 we are live.
we are live. Calling Rick.
Calling, uh, calling Chris Anderson. I don't know where you are. You're in. Are you in an undisclosed location?
I am. I'm in the secret bunker for History Happy Hour in Lincoln, England, and I am with Hugh McDonald Buchanan, who you'll meet in a little bit, and we are doing a site inspection of Bomber Command air bases.
Fantastic.
Uh, and you are, I think, in Chicago, if I'm
I
not
am
mistaken.
in the same old place. I did put on a jacket here
But
because
looking marvelous in the
knowing
same
that
old
you were
place.
going to be,
Yeah,
you've been upping the level for the dress
yeah,
both on tour and on the show, and
yeah.
I may have to go out and order a new wardrobe to keep up with you.
Well, I told you the shirts are on sale. Did you?
I believe me, Chris. This is one of those new on sale shirts from Cordings. Welcome everybody to History Happy Hour, brought to you with the help of Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours, which offers a variety of history tours in Europe, the U.S., and the Pacific, featuring many of the people you will see on the
How
show
about?
today, including Chris and I. And check it out at stephenambrosetours.com. And whether you're watching live or on replay or listening on the HHH podcast, thank you for joining us. We'll be talking today about the Normandy Breakout, what happens in the Battle of Normandy starting in the morning of June 7th. So let us know that you're here. Chris, we want to see people,
We
see what
do.
they're doing and where they're calling from. Who have we got?
We have Eric Moberly, Brian Peacock, Skip Cornett, Jack Sadler, um,
I
Lizzie
see
Borden,
Ken there and
yeah,
Lynn, Jim Latin, Doug McCord.
Nancy
Fantastic.
Nylands, yeah,
So we want to thank everybody there, and also thank, of course, all of our Patreon patrons, including our top shelf patrons,
yeah,
and
yeah,
everybody else who helps support this effort through Patreon to keep us in history and keep us in cocktails so that we were able to do the show.
exactly.
Um, and so I think we're probably ready to go. What do you think?
I think so. You ready?
Oh, not really. I'm always a little confused, but I'll give it a shot.
The bar is open.
The bar's open, and look, it's the real bell today,
Oh wow!
not the
It has
fake bell.
it has a
Yeah,
better
it has a
yeah
real bell sound.
yeah. So
This is
oh
up to you. You're introducing the show,
yeah.
Chris. So,
Well, no, sorry. I know. Um,
have you done
well,
this before? Do you need a
I
cue?
have.
Chris, you're on.
No, we were talking. Rick and I were talking about the upcoming masterclass to Normandy, and it grew out of last year's masterclass where we had a whole bunch of historians went to Normandy and spent a whole week diving in really great depth into what happened on June 6th. And we were picking up on that conversation, and we realized that for a lot of people, they think that after June 6th, everything's just hunky dory. Paris gets liberated and great things happen. But we don't spend enough time looking at kind of the hard slog that is the Normandy campaign. So out of that, and out of the success of the first masterclass, we've talked about doing a masterclass this year, which will be looking at everything that happens from June 7th till the end of the campaign at the end of August. And as a result of that conversation, we've decided to invite some of our friends who are all experts on their own little sliver of the Normandy campaign to just have a panel discussion to talk about uh, part of the war that needs a little bit more attention.
And all of whom are going to be part of the masterclass.
That's right.
It's like the dream team.
It is the dream team. Yes.
So we should introduce Hugh McDonald Buchanan, who is a Blue Badge guide. Everybody here is also been on History Happy Hour, so I know many of
Yes.
you will know them. And Erik Flint, who is in the U.S. Army at Fort Lewis in Washington, and who also served in one of those other services, the
Branch
U.S.
of the
Marine
service.
Corps.
No.
And Matt Broggie, who is a PhD candidate and longtime Ambrose tour person. All of you guys have led tours before, and great to have you all with us. It's going to be a lot of fun, I think, on the masterclass this year with everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're hoping that we're going to just kind of talk, basically talk amongst ourselves about a topic that we
Talk
find really
amongst
interesting,
yourselves.
and we hope that you ask us your questions about the Normandy campaign. So I thought maybe we could start with setting the scene a little bit. What's happening on the morning of June 7th? Where are we at? Where are the Allies facing, and how are things going? You want to dive in there?
Everyone's really tired.
Everyone's really tired. Okay.
Well, I again, just like you guys pointed out, after the Day of Days, it doesn't end there, and so the scramble begins. The immediate crisis of the of a averted tragedy at Omaha is past for the most part, and now it's how do we push out with the D-Day objectives met. In fact, I think that's a good place to start. If I would throw that out to one of my fellow guests, were those 6 June objectives met? And so where did the force sit on 7 June?
Well, I should pop in with that, Erik, and say that that the Canadians are the only people that actually met some of their D-Day objectives. So so they're well ahead of everybody. They're within 3 miles of Caen. But then
and there they will remain for 7.
Yeah, we'll get to that. But said the morning of June 7th, they're as far inland as any other beach.
Hugh, did you want to jump in? How are the
like
British doing on their objectives?
Mixed. I mean, the Gold Beach, where they advanced parallel to the Canadians, made good progress. The infantry, advanced guards, Green Howards, for example, were 9 miles inland. They were off target, but what they had done in the interim was beat off one of the few concerted counterattacks by Kampfgruppe Meyer, which came around the south of Bayeux, round about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That was beaten off. So all that was left to consolidate the position between Gold Beach and the front line were mopping up operations. And so they were poised on the 7th to take Bayeux, which happens, and they take the high ground behind Bayeux. The following day, they will link up with the troops coming off Omaha, which are 1st Division. So there's a lot of potential there to build up for another phase. And I think Erik was talking about looking to see what the plan was for perhaps making deeper penetration. Well, the opportunity of Gold Beach looks as though there's a clearish run through 2 towns down a river valley called the River Sioule. The first one is Tilly-sur-Sioule. The farthest one is a place called Vieux-Bocage, which is of strategic importance because it's a crossroads right in the middle of the whole of the D-Day landings. So the southern strut of that crossroads leads to Mount Pinson, which is the tallest ground in Normandy, therefore dominating. The eastern strut of those crossroads cuts back to Caen, and if taken and utilized, can actually cut behind the German position, say at Carpiquet, where there's considerable resistance at the time. And the western strut leads back into the American sector. And there was talk initially of that being a 1st or 2-day target. It doesn't quite happen like that, because the other thing which is beginning to happen and is inherited from the 6th is operations at a tactical level on the front line are being hampered by delays. And that's delays in getting follow-up troops ashore, supplies ashore, and in particular in getting the armor ashore. They managed to get together the 8th Armored Brigade, which was conceived by Montgomery as being one of the armored flying columns that are going to make the penetration, but it's just beginning to slow up. And that's the story of the 7th. And something similar is happening over on Sword Beach as well. As well, been well charted, Caen, which was established as an ambitious 1st-day target, it is not taken, and as we know, won't be taken for over a month. And again, the problems are similar there. A little bit of resistance, but above all else, supply problems coming off Sword Beach are creating problems. So that's what's happening in the early days following D-Day.
So Rick, we're getting a lot of requests for maps.
Here's a sort of a simplified map of the campaign, which doesn't include simply D-Day, but or D-Day +1, but it's really the 6 weeks or so, almost up until the Falaise Gap, but you do see here kind of the position of the various different armies. If you were looking at the map, and I know if you're listening to the podcast you can't see it, but you see how the Canadians, from the way we were looking at it, are on the right, and the Americans are on the left. But one of the things that always struck me in this, and maybe Chris or Matt, you can speak to this, is that the terrain is so different.
Yeah.
As we hit June 7th, the terrain that the British face is real different than the Americans, because one side has got the British have sort of some open areas, some hills, and in the American areas it's largely the bocage, the hedgerows. So that must have a huge effect on this campaign.
Matt,
Yeah, sure. It certainly does. I mean, that if you know anything about the Normandy campaign and the American sector, you always know about the hedgerow issues, the checkerboard pattern of the terrain. You don't know what is happening in the next field adjacent to whatever field you're in.
How big are those hedgerows? I mean, they're pretty small, aren't they?
It ranges. Driving through the villages that we've gone through on the tours. Some of you guys would know, they range from, sometimes they're maybe 5 feet. There's a mound that they grow out of.
Right.
So altogether, that might be about 10 feet, but then the actual,
they're pretty impassable.
The trees themselves can grow up to 10, 15, 20 feet. And so they can be a huge, huge barrier, in between
it's
properties.
It's like a chessboard of walled gardens.
And then another point on that is when the roads that existed, and you can still see it in some of the more rural places, the roads tend to sink, which gives greater height to the hedgerows as well. And those lanes are really what we call fatal funnels. Mm-hmm. So as you break, if you take one hedgerow and then you plop down into a lane, and you've got vehicles or personnel, and the way the Germans would establish their defenses, that was a terrible place to be. And momentum just would cease.
Yeah.
Well,
and furthermore, you're confined to those lanes, which are really small. So it's very difficult to deploy power.
Right.
Absolutely.
But I think one of the problems you reach in the British sector, and you can maybe add into this, you'll see it when you approach, if you've approached Normandy on the ferry and you're landing Caen and then you drive up to Caen. You don't have hedgerows there. What you have are wide open fields and a slowly rising slope and a ridge just outside of Caen. So that the Germans know that that's dominating ground. If you stand on it, and when we go on the tour, we'll show it to you. It dominates the whole area. So the Germans park hundreds of 88s on that high ground. And the British and Commonwealth troops are advancing across basically wide open fields across a pool table, and it's almost impossible for rapid advances of the type that they've done in the desert and earlier. So the terrain is different in each of the sectors, but it really dominates and determines how the battles play themselves out.
Well, a question to everybody, because it's fallen out of my head, but the consolidation of the beachheads across the Allied front. We know that the British and Canadian beaches are able to consolidate. So on 7 June, have they linked up with the American forces at Omaha? And when was Carentan, that critical road juncture that would bring Utah and Omaha together, when was that supposed to be taken?
Well, obviously it was supposed to be taken early on, right? But it's not until 11/12.
Well, the idea that there was an expectation that they would be able to drive to Carentan, I guess on that one day, and just nobody recognizing the hedgerows, and it's one of those extraordinary intelligence failures to just boggles the mind.
Well, and that's the story. I've always wondered, because this is what everybody writes, is that there's this huge intelligence failure. We've planned we've spent months or years trying to put people ashore and deal with that first 24 hours, and then we kind of haven't done any planning at all or thought at all for the days and months afterwards. Is that really true, or is that just a kind of a something that's been affixed to it after the fact?
Matt. Oh no, I just
okay, everybody points to somebody else.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, from a command point of view, you're given a mission. So you go down to the division level, and everybody, this landing is extremely complex. They're utilizing new tactics, new organization, all kinds of very specific equipment to breach the Atlantic wall, and it's very complex. And I think there is a level of tunnel vision and a focus on getting ashore.
Yeah.
And after that, that's fire and maneuver. We practice that all the time. We're great at it, no worries. And so whether hedgerows were not properly accounted for or not known, the expectation being, oh, well, we're this, at least for the American side and the British, I would say as well, we're a highly mechanized force. And so fire and maneuver is what we do. We've got air cover. Yeah. So some hedges won't be a problem. Yeah. And so I think there is a tunnel vision on the assault because of how complex and how unique to, at least for American fighting doctrine, it is.
Right.
There's no secret about the hedgerows. Like, everybody knew that they were there. And I like to point out too on tour that, remember, the British evacuated from Normandy in 1940, not just from Dunkirk, but many divisions fled all the way out through Cherbourg. And so they it's not like they came across these weird structures, these trees and these things. Like, well, we're totally.
By Jove, we've never seen this before.
Exactly. And yet, not like any British has ever been to France. They knew they were there. There's anybody that says that it was an intelligence failure. I don't think that's the right way to say it. I think the way, or maybe the failure, was the practical way of maneuvering in hedgerow country. That wasn't accounted for, I think, to what you're saying, Erik, because the tunnel vision was on establishing the beachhead, and then June 7th will kind of take care of itself in a manner of speaking, and that included,
certainly from a British point of view, there was not a lot of focus on tactical operations that might happen in bocage country, and like you've all been saying, there's big focus, and all the big dress rehearsals have been focused on the beach stuff. Another complication is that so many of the British troops had actually come in from the desert and recent experience in Sicily and Italy, where they'd adapted their tactics to suit those conditions. And for the relatively short period of time that they're in the UK, they weren't amending those tactics at all. So they were using tactics that weren't appropriate in completely different countryside.
Well, and I would add to that, and then maybe we can also get some of the questions that are coming in from the audience. I think that it's safe to say there's a general underestimation of the abilities of the Germans to mount a defense. I think that the Allies are so enamored of their firepower and the weight of ordnance that they can bring on the shore. Yeah. I don't think that there's a real appreciation for just how determined the German defenses are going to be, and how adaptable the German army is to that situation. And so they face an opponent. The battle in Normandy becomes so attritional so quickly. I don't think we're really ready for that, and I think that that's another issue that they have to work through.
So we do have some questions from the audience, but first, a question I neglected to ask early on is, since we're here at History Happy Hour, is about what cocktails you've brought with you. And could I go and, I since we're dealing mostly with things that happen in France, I brought a nice Côte de Rhone with me.
Just the whole bottle?
Look how much of it I've gotten through. Oh my God, that's just getting ready for the show.
That was just Rick, the green room, man.
It's amazing. Well, that's the second bottle. Chris, what have you got?
Well, since we're seeing a lot of RAF bases on this site inspection, I have a Spitfire Ale.
Oh,
all right. Downed all over Kent, just like
that's right.
Okay, yeah. Hugh, what have you brought with you?
Well, I have an ale. It's called Abbot Ale, very appropriate because we're sitting in the shadow of Lincoln Cathedral. Furthermore, it was brewed.
That's either a very big bottle of ale or your hands have grown smaller over the last few years.
I just moved it further into focus. Also, it was brewed in Bury St Edmunds, where we visited as part of the Recce Royal Observation Corps depot and a control unit, and that's a place that's really worth seeing if you all come back over to the UK.
Erik, popping you up and down there.
My own COVID concoction called the Zombie on Holiday, which was the result of trying to make a Mai Tai but not having enough ingredients, so I just winged it, and in a beautiful, we'll call it French Polynesian to tie into the whole French thing.
Oh, I like that.
Here's looking up your address.
Yeah.
Nice, awesome.
Needs an umbrella.
We've
You're right, it does.
And I noticed that at least we have one audience member who says that they have a Sin Pack Special. Sin Pack Special, which is a drink that we discussed with Craig Simons when he was on, which was
Nice.
is a combination of rum, bourbon, bitters, and sugar. And I'll tell you, that
Ye
drink
gods.
packs a punch.
That was Nimitz's drink, right? That was
Yeah,
his
and he
go-to.
apparently
Yeah,
made it
yeah.
by the jerry can full.
I love
Probably
it.
also
Try
had
to shove it
aviation
down.
gas in it.
Yeah, now you know why and how we won in the Pacific. But Chris, one of the
more.
questions we
Wait,
have.
me.
Matt,
Me.
Oh, Matt.
This is
So hurtful.
It's
I'm
okay.
so sorry.
The pride and joy of Ventura County, California, my hometown, the 805
Woo-hoo.
Ale here. Yeah.
Right on.
Right.
Yeah.
Matt's
Good
never
stuff.
going to forgive me that. There's another
I know.
friendship gone.
That's all right.
Is
There's
that
too many
the
of us
only
in here,
can of
yeah.
805 ale in Colorado? Then?
Yeah, I found it. That's the only one.
I can't count up to 5, Matt. So, so that's where we go wrong there. We have a question from Brian Peacock about how did the 29th Division do in meeting their 6 June objectives? Who'd like to give a shot at that?
Well, they didn't.
Mark Balcosta.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they got off the beach, but that was they along with the rest of Fifth Corps didn't achieve their goal.
No. And actually, Chris, just to step back, when we talk about everybody focusing on D-Day and you look at the 29th, the 1st, and the 4th from the American side, everything. But what about the follow-on units? What about the 2nd Division, 90th,
Right.
and all those guys that come in those subsequent days? Their training was not as focused or at all on the amphibious breaching portion. So again, those guys have been in England or in the UK training for fire and maneuver. So I think our original discussion about that focus on day one falls apart once the follow-on forces.
Yep.
Well, and we're jumping around a little bit, but one of the things that comes up in the story of Normandy and definitely is a part of our trip is as the 29th moves out of Omaha Beach, and if we look at the general map here, Omaha Beach is about where the cross is there for the Normandy American Cemetery, and the 29th is moving down. They move towards Saint-Lô. And the battle for Saint-Lô becomes a huge fight that is of incredible violence and something that, I think is a big part of the 29th story and a big part of the Normandy story, and that we'll be, visiting there to kind of learn about.
Yeah.
I want to say that the 29th and the 1st Division, they had obviously one hell of a June 6th. But then after June 6th, it goes relatively smoothly until they get to Saint-Lô. Compare that to Utah Beach in the 4th Division.
Right.
They get ashore very easily, but then their issues really start on June 7th. So it's I'd like saying the contrast between the two beaches, like it's an opposite events that are happening.
So,
Absolutely. And the way that the follow-on forces are able to come on and start to reinforce. But, that period of time, that first week where, we've got the weight of the Allied force shoving things ashore. We've got the Mulberry still functioning. But then we start, because of the bocage, we start to get the log jam at the beaches.
Yeah.
So
Rick, do you want
Sorry.
to bring this?
Oh, no, I know. I'm just trying to load something,
Oh,
another
no.
map up.
Oh,
And I love.
or you just want to keep me on
No,
We
screen?
all like
Oh,
looking at Erik. It's a great beard, the great bookshelves. Why
Thank
not?
you. You're too
So-
kind, Rick.
Did
So
you want to bring
the-
another question in, Chris?
Yeah, I was going to say, we've had some questions about air power. Wally has asked, why could not air power take out the 88s? There are a couple things going on with air power. One of the biggest is that the 8th Air Force and Bomber Command are strategic bombing forces. They don't have the precision to necessarily take out, very specific targets on the ground. And of course, what happens at Omaha Beach is a perfect example of that. Second of all, this battle is expanding so rapidly. There are limited aerial resources, and so you have air resources are stretched really thin. They don't really have the training or expertise to act to impact specific targets on the ground. And the doctrine of aerial support it's evolving at this point. So they just don't have the precision that you would need to do that.
Well,
I
and
don't know
even
if
as
you guys agree with
the Ninth Air Force on the American side, but you're talking about hundreds of 88s, which were originally designed for
Anti-aircraft.
aircraft.
that. Right.
So I think bringing in low-level tactical aircraft that have more precision, that would not be a fun
Mission.
run. Yeah,
Yeah,
that would be pretty tough.
Yeah, and also
There's an
remember
interesting, there's an interesting corollary to that story, which I think point Erik is making, is that the German flat defenses were immensely strong, and locally because 88s were dual purpose, and this had one impact on the operations in the week following D-Day in the Gold Beach sector, where Montgomery wanted to activate the 1st British Airborne Division and drop it behind behind Carpiquet, between Carpiquet and Vieux Bocage. And the reason and they'd been planning this before D-Day, so the staff work had been done, the aircraft were allocated, and so on and so forth. That maneuver was kiboshed by Lee Mallory, supported by Ramsey, because they were so scared.
Lee Mallory being the air commander, Ramsey being the naval commander.
Yeah, I'm sorry, and Ramsey being the naval commander, and Ramsey was scared of friendly fire. Yeah. But it was all driven by the fact that the German flak defenses were really very, very powerful.
Well, and also remember that it's sort of a chicken and egg scenario. Until Carpiquet is taken, all the aircraft that have to fly over the battlefield are coming from England. So A, they have a lot less time over the battle space, and B, it takes time. So the Germans aren't going to sit there with their guns, just wait for the planes to come over and bomb them. So, that's
it's just so rude of them.
I know.
And elaborating that point, it's not just the big bombers; it's the fighter bombers too, until they get airfields locally.
Right.
Hey, Chris, talk a little bit about if you or start a conversation about we talked about a little bit on the show the Canadians, the kind of the forgotten soldiers of Normandy who are involved in some very intense operations during the fighting and in Normandy, especially up on Verrières Ridge, and they do well, but they take a hard hitting as well.
Yeah, so they really take it on the nose, and they advance very far inland that first day, or the farthest inland. But then after that German tank attack late on the afternoon of D-Day that we alluded to before, they're held back. The Germans kind of solidify their defenses around Caen, and then there's going to be a series of battles that are fought to try to take Caen from both flanks there, and you can see one of the sweeping movements there, and there'll be a series of pretty brutal attritional battles against the Germans. And it's one of the things that's important to remember is Caen is the most heavily defended part of the Normandy sector. Most of the German reinforcements that arrive in Normandy arrive in Caen. And by the end of July, beginning of August, in the American sector, you've got about a division and a half of panzers in the American sector. In the British sector and the Canadian sector around Caen, you have elements of 6 panzer divisions, and most of them are SS panzer divisions. So the Canadians are going to get hit as part of this, and they get involved to try to take a place called Verrières Ridge, which is after Caen has been taken, but they're trying to move from Caen to Falaise, and just absolutely horrific battles. And one of the examples of just how terrifying it is there's a regiment, the Black Watch of Canada, probably Canada's senior regiment in the field, and they attack to try to take Verrières Ridge. There are elements of 3 panzer divisions on the ridge, and the entire battalion is just wiped out. They don't even know what happens to it, really. I mean, it just goes up a hill and is destroyed.
And I mean, this is just to purely to advertise for the trip. I mean, this is an amazing location because you're up there on the ridge, and where there's a memorial but you can see the whole sweep. You can see the whole battle as it unfolded, where the wheat fields were that the soldiers fell in as they were trying to take the ridge. I mean, it's a very dramatic location.
Well, and yeah, and that's one of the things that we each of us want to stress as we're going along. We all have our favorite spots, but one of the things that we're going to hope to do with this trip is to take you to some of these places that illustrate just how horrific and difficult this campaign was beyond the 6th. So, I'll be spending a lot of time with the Canadians, and we're going to follow this one battalion, the Black Watch of Canada, from their jump-off point up to the ridge. And as Rick said, the terrain is amazing, and I know all you other guys have spots that you're going to take us to spots where you can really get a sense of just what this campaign was like. So,
and along those lines, and kind of, I know we're kind of ping-ponging a little bit between sectors here, and I think that that's okay. So we kind of go back and forth. But, one of the things that happens in the American sector is after they cut off the Cotentin Peninsula, and I'll put the map back up here, my simple Normandy map. The Cotentin Peninsula, which has Cherbourg at the point of it, up towards the upper left here in the screen, if you can see. And after the peninsula has been cut off, there's a battle, kind of a fight to take that rest of that peninsula, take Cherbourg, that nobody ever talks about. And it's this, it's dramatic, it's huge, it has multiple medals of honor. It's amazing.
Yep. Well, I think Matt can
probably.
Yeah, but I mean, I was just going to say that the casualties for this whole campaign approach World War I proportions. I mean, this is the kind of battle we're talking about. This is bad stuff.
Well, and when you think of the scale, by the middle of the month, we've got 500,000 Allied soldiers ashore. And so, that seems like a massive number. But like I'm sure Matt can talk about, the fight up the peninsula, the 3 major German units there had been, Rommel wanted them to either withdraw to the south or go up and reinforce Cherbourg. And Hitler said, no, they're all going to stay in place and, hold it. So, Matt.
Yeah.
We're all looking at you, Matt.
All right. Well, like the first major barrier, and honestly, like I said, like getting ashore at Utah was relatively easy. Not I shouldn't even say easy. It was easier compared to what was happening at Omaha Beach, and that's a common misconception when you looking at Utah Beach. It was not a cakewalk, as Omar Bradley states in his memoir. But nonetheless, June 7th is where the problems really do begin, because they run into the 4th Division, the spearheading division at Utah, will run into Azoville and Krisbeck, these massive blockhouse guns. That is Krisbeck. That is a lot of concrete. Okay? And at Krisbeck, there are 3 of those guns. That's a 210 millimeter gun that's threatening the landings and all the supplies coming ashore at Utah. But outside of the rim, the southern approach to these 3 blockhouses, there's minefields and sniper positions and pill boxes. This is an aerial reconnaissance photo taken on May 22nd, 1944. So just a week and a half or so before D-Day, obviously. And Krisbeck was no secret. Okay, apparently it was a well-known, and we blasted the hell out of it. And it had little effect because the garrison that's there, led by a Oberleutnant named Walter Ohmsen. It's a Kriegsmarine. It's actually a Navy Navy aspect of the German defenses, who are manning these guns, because those guns are typically naval guns, and so you have Navy operating those guns and defending those positions. It was an absolute. It was absolute carnage. The 4th Division gets chewed up approaching Azoville and Krisbeck, and they delay Ohmsen in his command. He delays the entire advance by about 8 days.
Wow.
That's how long it takes the 4th Division, the 22nd Regiment specifically, to get around those 2 fortifications, Azoville and Krisbeck. And the chain reaction of that, 8 days of delay, means you're that much later getting up to Cherbourg, the port at the very northern tip of the peninsula there. And that is the entire point of a Utah landing, or a landing on the Cotentin Peninsula, is to seize that port as soon as possible. That's what Montgomery envisioned when he was drawing up this plan with Eisenhower as well. He also agreed with this, that Cherbourg was so important that we're going to throw a division, a fifth landing here against the Cotentin, and make sure that Cherbourg gets captured as soon as possible. But because of the command by Olmsen at Krisbeck, the 8-day delay allows the Germans to do delaying action all the way up the peninsula. And then when they finally do get to Cherbourg on the 25th, 26th, 27th June, they push out the German defenders, and they get a look at the harbor, and it's completely sabotaged, demolished. The port won't be open to 100% capacity until early September.
Fighting at the very end in Cherbourg is we're going to try to take people. Access is challenging, but we're going to try to take people up to Fort de Roule. There's this fort on top of this huge hill. It's not like, we get close and then we get in and it's fine. It's like every inch is contested and under terribly
it's
difficult
an urban
terrain.
Fight.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And when the terrain is so critical, and Matt, you know, been to Krisbeck many times, but you look at the dominating position of that terrain, because it's a great place to go, and you can look out to the channel and you can look out to the northern Utah Beach sector, but all the ground to the south that you have to fight up. And then when you get up to Cherbourg, again, it's not a pool table heading up to Cherbourg.
Right.
And now you're in a very tough urban fight.
Right.
Forget the fact you've got a Napoleonic, super fortress there.
Well, you can see from this map, and I'm a big map fan, and I know some of our audience members are too. The areas that are red are higher.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so you can see, we're not talking about mountains, but you can see there's some real high ground up there towards Cherbourg, which of course the Germans are holding as we approach.
Yeah. And I'll say here too, I want to mention there's 2 medals of honor are earned fighting towards Fort de Roule on the same day, in the same division, in the same regiment. They're Corporal John Kelly and First Lieutenant Carlos Ogden. Right. Those are they earn them on the same day.
Within a few hundred yards of each other.
And exactly. And they both live. They both live through it.
I thought there was a third one too.
I might be wrong.
Matt, were both those guys in the 4th Division, or were they in the 9th?
That's the 79th Division. Yeah.
Oh, the 79th. Okay. Well.
Yeah. And I'm looking, and I'm hoping to find the exact location to go to on the tour. I think I may have it figured out where their action took place.
Well, so Matt, picking up on that, why don't each of us talk about, kind of one of the spots they're most excited about showing people, and maybe why? Why is that? What does that illustrate about kind of the campaign? Who wants to start?
Matt, go first.
Matt, go first. He just did.
I just did. I'll say. Yeah, definitely.
Because my mind's racing, so I have to come up with something.
When I get
we have to stall a little bit.
My brain gets in squirrel mode, and
get me a nut. Get me a nut.
You're among friends.
Yeah, definitely Fort de Roule. Exactly. I would say Fort de Roule is mine. I've never been in it because it's inaccessible to buses, and so that's
right. So we're trying to work out a shuttle. Yeah. We'll tell everybody, this is our job, right? We're trying to work out a way to take you to places we can't normally take you. I was sure you were going to say Krisbeck, because you've been talking about Krisbeck for 2 years.
I know.
Every time a tour conversation comes up, Krisbeck, it's like Matt.
Krisbeck's out.
Well, I've been there. I've seen it before, but so Fort de Roule would be brand new to me. That's what I'm excited about. To actually bring people there, indeed. Yeah.
Well, I'll say echo some of what Matt said, but I found Krisbeck first. No, I actually stumbled across it.
Oh, you kicked it with your foot when you were walking through there.
It was the kind of thing that we all know the joys of the big anniversaries. And so back during the 70th, it was just hard to somewhere.
I was at Krisbeck before you were born, Erik.
Yes. Yes. I'm sorry. Being around soldiers all day, I'm like the ancient old guy. So Rick, you're making me feel good.
I know. Awesome. I'm working on it. Shave that beard, you'll look 20 years younger.
That's the point. Anyway, but the finding Crisbeck was, we just didn't have anywhere to go, and we actually rolled up there first thing in the morning with this extraordinary view at about the same time it would have been on D-Day, and it was so powerful to stand on that key piece of terrain. And like Max said, that it's one of those things that just illustrates how a small force, well led, and there's a great story about it being overrun. Then there's a back and forth that really goes on, but then to see that terrain and to follow that up to Cherbourg, and of course I can't wait. Hope we get into Fort Garul as well. Yep. But again, to be able to illustrate, there are these small towns with some really tough fights, especially the 22nd Infantry as it's pounding north. That's what I'm excited to see.
Hugh McDonald Buchanan.
Hey, I'd really like to take people to the high ground around about Vieux Bocage, so you can look down on the Sioule Valley and see in particular where what started as a maneuver and a battle of penetration now becomes a battle of a canter and gradually breaks down into a battle of attrition. This was the very area where the Panzer and the freshly arriving Panzer Leibstandarte start arriving and meet the British attack head on using Tiger tanks as their spearhead, and they manage to plug up the gap that's there between the essentially Carpiquet and Bayeux. And the reason that's important is that was the last chance the Allies really had for some time of finding an exposed flank and doing a right hook and trying to make something of it. Once that was plugged, which it was on the 14th, then the whole line, as it were, becomes like a battle of attrition. And suddenly the battle begins to look, Chris mentioned the First World War, but some of the tactics and the maneuvers, almost by accident, begin to look like a First World War battlefield. That is to say, troops are reluctant to move forward at any great speed unless they're within range of their own artillery. This looks very like the bite and hold tactics that were used on the Western Front in the First World War. And as Chris was saying, and you all been saying earlier, it becomes really gritty after that. It's a long battle of attrition until the build-up can get to the point where something on the opposite side has got to crack.
I think for me, there's a couple of places. I mean, there's a lot of places. In Mortagne, Hill 314, where the 30th Division is defending against the German counterattack, and it is just such an incredibly dramatic location, and you can kind of see for miles and sort of get a sense of the dramatic stand there. I'm a big fan of the Polish forces, and so to go to the Polish cemetery and to go to Montormel, where the Poles are involved in the fighting in the Falaise Gap and kind of holding the Germans off here in the Falaise Gap. And those are two. I mean, there could be more, but those are two locations we've talked about. And I think we're going to go to the American Cemetery in Brittany. It's a cemetery that probably very few tourists visit. I've been there. It was very, very quiet, and yet there's all sorts of amazing stories because there's amazing fighting that takes place on Brittany. Another masterclass will have to happen later, but we can touch on some of it by telling some of those stories at that cemetery. So those are a few places for me.
Yeah, I think. Well, I've already had a chance to talk about the Black Watch of Canada going up to Verrières Ridge. So I'm really excited to be able to walk that battalion's whole attack. You can follow it from village to village, and we can talk about individual company commanders and see how they're trying to keep this attack going and achieve their objective, what happens. And it's a great illustration of what is happening throughout that whole sector of Normandy, but to just focus on that one unit. So I'm really looking forward to doing that. And also the other one is the death of Michael Vitman. So for those of you that, I think, again, we kind of lose sight of this fact. we think about Normandy as being a series of amphibious assaults and whatnot. Some of the largest tank battles of the war are fought in Normandy. So in and around Caen in the British and Canadian sector, it is the largest armored battle for British and Commonwealth forces during the war, bigger than anything that happens in the desert or any other time. So in the course of some of these fights, they come up against Michael Vitman, who, if you are unaware, is a very nasty piece of work, a diehard Nazi, but he's also one of the leading Panzer aces of the war. And he's done a lot of damage, and he's largely responsible for stopping that attack at Villers-Bocage. But as all good things come to an end, we get to go to the spot where Michael Vitman finally gets what's coming to him. And I'm really looking forward to showing people where that nasty SOB finally gets his due.
Well, Chris, talking about Vitman, when did that
How do you really feel?
the post-war, he wasn't a Nazi, he was a noble warrior, rubbish sort of come in. And I guess, his wife, who was till recently still alive, doesn't have nice things to say about Jewish people, and he is a guy.
One of the last time I was there at the cemetery in Normandy where he's buried, and it was sort of annoying and upsetting that people, Erik, along the lines of what you're speaking, people put things down there to honor him, and I'm talking about Americans. Saw a badge from a sheriff's department. I'm not going to say what sheriff's department it was. I saw, and it's like, what are you doing here? This guy is a Nazi. He's an enemy. I don't say you have to desecrate his grave, but let's not go there making him some sort of saint or martyr out of him.
Right. Well, the other thing I do want to add really quickly, though, that I'm really looking forward to probably most of all is just like the last masterclass we did. We're going to be going out, spending all day really diving into the weeds of this campaign, but then we're planning every night at the end of the day, all the historians getting together and continuing the conversation we're having right now. So, questions
with cocktails.
With cocktails, yes.
Which
just like we are right now.
Are we doing day drinking on the bus?
It depends on the driver, probably.
Good.
But no, it'll be a wonderful opportunity to kind of expand on some of these conversations and get more questions. I'm really looking forward to that. That was one of the best parts of the last trip.
Right, yeah. and we've really only begun. It's funny. We I want to save a little time for us to talk about books to recommend, but we've really only begun to talk about the places that we go, because we have, Operation Goodwood, which is Montgomery's breakout or attempted breakout on the British side. We have Operation Cobra. We have the death of General Theodore Roosevelt, Erik, which I know you're really interested in. We have the death of General Leslie McNair, who is killed in friendly fire incidents, and we have
the almost death of Field Marshal Rommel.
We have the almost death of Field Marshal Rommel, and then we have the death of Field Marshal Rommel. So, and all of these things, influence the fighting, and they're all part of what we'll be kind of discussing as we visit the locations. Because there's the picture of each individual location, and then there's the big picture. And one of the things that Chris is always very good at keeping our minds on is that it's not two campaigns. It's not a British-Canadian campaign and an American campaign. It's one campaign, and there's one general named Dwight Eisenhower who's kind of keeping that together.
Unity of command. And one of the saddest things about Leslie McNair dying is he's one of the few old guys who survived the George Marshall purge of 1940-41. I even seen things that he was in charge of all Army ground forces. So he was the guy back in the States responsible for generating all that ground combat power that winds up getting deployed. But he had been deemed by Marshall, he could remain in service, but Marshall didn't want to see him out with a forward field command. So, and this was a big thing for him after he'd been spending years responsible to create these forces to finally be able to go forward and be there for what was supposed to be, the big push, the big day.
Yeah.
So if you guys can all stand to take a drink, there is a Ghost Army story connected with Leslie McNair. Okay, cheers. And there was a colonel named Clifford Simonson who had worked for McNair as he's building up the ground forces as the ground forces commander. And he finishes his assignment, and McNair says, well, what do you want to do next? And he says, I'd like to command an airborne regiment. And he says, great, we'll send you to airborne school. And he goes to airborne school, and he does 2 jumps in airborne school. He's on his way. And after 2 jumps, he gets these orders transferring him to this bizarre special deception unit that he has no idea. He doesn't even know it's a deception unit. It's just a special unit. He knows that's like a death sentence, a special unit. And he says he rides the train all the way to Camp Forest in Tennessee saying, who the F did I piss off? And he never...
I say that quite often myself.
But it turned out he becomes one of the most important figures in the Ghost Army story. So just saying, there it is. There's a Ghost Army story for everything. If you come on the Masterclass, you'll hear many of them. Like it or not.
And you will be required to drink.
You are required to drink every time the words Ghost Army are mentioned. We did have a request, and we talked about doing this, and I think we have a little time left to talk about books that you might read in preparation for this. And Chris, because I know you're as the host, co-host, main host, senior historian, you're the most prepared on this topic. We'll start with you for some book suggestions.
Well, I think to get a good sense of the overall fight around Khan, it's called a book called Khan, Anvil of Victory, by Alexander McKee. I think it's probably the best 1-volume history that explains all the different British operations, Operation Goodwood, Charnwood, Totalize, there's bunches of them. And he weaves it into a pretty good, solid narrative. So I would recommend that. And then my second go-to would be John Keegan's 6 Armies in Normandy. It's a masterpiece, and what I like so much about it is he focuses on the different nations involved, takes the story of their army in one particular part of the campaign, and really kind of does a deep dive on how the soldiers from that place fought and how they changed over the course of the Normandy campaign. So.
Yeah, and I was thinking when I saw you make that suggestion, it had been a long time since I've read that book, so I've pulled it out and have it ready to go through again. Mr. Broggie.
Yeah, right now I'm going through Craig Simon's Neptune for the second time. I mean, Operation Neptune, excuse me. I know he's been on the show twice, 3 times or so.
More than you, Matt. But
definitely.
Only one more than you now. And actually, you might be tied. It might be the same. You might have been on the same number of times now.
He's like the Steve Martin of Saturday Night Live.
But you might be the
get a
Martin
smoking
Short
jacket
of,
at 3
History Happy Hour.
Yeah, but that book is just, the more I read it, you want to understand the formation of Operation Neptune / Overlord. It's so well written, and the detail is great. But then also pertaining to the Masterclass tour, he discusses in great detail the seizure of Cherbourg from the naval side. You don't think about the Navy playing a role in capturing Cherbourg, but there's a bunch of coastal fortifications protecting Cherbourg. And there's U.S. naval task forces that get deployed, and they have amazing duels with these coastal fortifications. And it's, you got to read it, and you got to get that book if you don't have it, for sure.
And I'm sure he also talks about another thing we haven't touched on in this talk: the storm, the terrible storm that knocks out the
mulberries,
the American mulberry, and the impact that has on the campaign.
That's right.
Let's see, Hugh, what have you got here for?
I've got an old classic, Decision in Normandy by Carlo D'Este, which is first of all, it's not as vast as some of the tomes on D-Day, but it's such an efficient book. It covers so much ground within a digestible space. He has, I think, a really good understanding of the
keep holding that there, Matt. Keep going, Hugh.
He also has some really good maps in it, which aren't too confusing. Just explains his case really, really well. And I think he's got a fantastic eye for a battlefield.
And I want to add, I think the other thing I love so much about that book is that he's an American historian, but I think he has a very balanced view of Montgomery and Montgomery's command in Normandy.
Yeah, I don't know of another author that analyzes the issues and controversies with Montgomery more or better than D'Este.
I would agree.
Yeah.
Am I allowed to choose a second book?
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
This
Someone
will
else will have
this-
to hold it up, but
This will make Chris laugh a bit.
testing everybody's library. I know, Eric, you've got the biggest library, so I'm sure
why, thank
whatever
you.
Hugh comes up with, you've got it.
I'll try.
Well, this will be interesting. It's a book called March Past, which is the autobiography by Lord Lovat, who was the famous commando leader, the man who led the commandos across Pegasus Bridge to get to the high ground. It's an autobiography, so it takes you from his early days. You understand where he comes from, what he's about, so you understand his character. But he gives such an insight into the way that commandos were trained and applied as shock troops on the British and Commonwealth beaches. And his story about how they had to hold the line on the high ground above Pegasus Bridge is absolutely fascinating, not least because it describes how they were able to link up really efficiently with one of the gunboats. I think it was HMS Ramillies or Roberts, I can't quite remember which one. So when they see a panzer attack developing in the woods behind them, they can whistle up on the radio, where their 14.5-inch shells come roaring over. He says they come roaring over. Sounds exactly like an express train, right on target. But it gives a lot of tiny little insights that you don't necessarily get from a general book on a battlefield.
Yeah. And Rick?
Oh, so I have a couple. I would first a book that I'm very familiar with is Beyond the Beachhead by Joe Belkowski, and of course the first 150 pages. It's about the 29th Infantry Division. So the first 150 pages are about the preparation and about Normandy, but then the 150 pages after that are about the breakout, about the battle for St. Lo, about the death of Major Howie in St. Lo, which is I'm sure a place that we're going to visit on this trip. And Joe's amazing, and so I always like to tout his work.
Absolutely.
And then I would also say, just if you're going to go for a classic, Breakout and Pursuit by Martin Blumenson, which is kind of the original, the original, and both of these are on the American side, so I recognize that's a bias, but they're both, and Beyond the Beachhead is a smaller book. Breakout and Pursuit is a bigger book.
It's truly a light read.
Yeah, I think this is actually real metal on the side because it's such a heavy book. But those
you can't carry that on. You got to check that when you fly.
That's
yeah.
You have to ship it in advance, I think. But those are the ones that are on my list. So, listen,
Erik.
do we have
Erik's
Chris?
book.
Do we have any other questions that we have to answer
I get to
from
look at a
people?
book?
Erik's book first. Yeah.
Oh, any translations of German books? Ron wants to know.
Well, Hans von Lucht did a book that talks quite a bit about the armored battles around Caen, and so that I would recommend very strongly. There are some books written by some members of the 12th SS that, they're
That you would not
translated from
recommend
German.
so strongly.
Yeah, I don't feel quite as good about, but
There's a book that is not about Normandy at all, but that is just an amazing book called The German War. I'm looking at it right here.
by Stargart.
Yeah, which is if you're interested in kind of walking through the entire war, all theaters and homeland from the point of view of the German soldiers and the German families, that's a pretty amazing book. And somebody mentioned D-Day Through German Eyes, which doesn't necessarily deal with the further Normandy campaign, but gives you a good impact there.
And I think we've gotten a lot of requests for book lists. So maybe when this is all said and done, Rick and I will sit down and type up the titles and post it on our webpage.
We'll post it, but we'll send out a special newsletter, a special History Happy Hour newsletter. So, if you're not signed up, you can go to historyhappyhour.com, and that little thing will come up after you're there for 5 or 10 seconds. You're like, this is really annoying, but that'll let you sign up for the newsletter, or you can go to the contact page there and sign up, and we'll
Erik has a
put
book
that out.
still.
I do. 'Cause
I'm sorry, Eric.
No,
Not really,
I forgot
but-
Matt before.
It's
I forgot
it's a
Erik
coloring
now.
book, actually.
Of course.
No,
It just seems like you've been
it
talking
comes
so
with
much,
markers.
Erik. I assumed we'd gotten to you.
well, that was my assumption as well, till Matt reminded me. The book I have is it's when you get to the ground, and it's the book that made me appreciate the fight up the peninsula. And it came from a family tour. I took 6 members of one family whose late patriarch had been a private with the 4th Division, 22nd Infantry, landed on D-Day, fought all the way through the war.
Wow.
And it's just a simple book called War Stories. There are 2 volumes, and it's just a series of grunt level accounts of each day fighting up. And it's
all 4th Division, Erik?
Yeah, it's just 4th Division. The Poison Ivy, or as we say, 4 lieutenants heading north. As a former lieutenant, I think that's hilarious. But it and so I was trying to research this family's, their patriarch's personal experience. And we went through some small towns that he fought in, and he got wounded, but getting an appreciation for just the day-to-day life of an American infantryman slogging it up the peninsula, that really gave me a better appreciation.
Nice. Yeah.
Awesome suggestions. The one thing I want to just point out again to people, we're all going to be the historians on the Stephen Ambrose Tours Masterclass, Normandy Breakout Masterclass. I'm throwing the link up in the comments. The only bad thing is that you'll have to be with all of us and deal with our strange interpersonal issues, as well as peccadillos and bad habits.
Video chat is one thing, but yeah, traveling across Europe.
But yeah,
but other than that, it's going to be a
lock
great
yourself
time.
in a bus with these people and see what happens. Okay, hijinks ensue. So,
Indeed.
hey, listen, Hugh and Matt and Erik, thank you so much for joining us today. So I'm really looking forward to seeing you guys in let's see, February, March, April, 3 months,
3 months,
3.5 months, something like that.
Hooray.
It's not
Yay.
too far. We'll be seeing you in the Zooms to plan for the tour, and we'll see you on the ground in April.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
Sounds good.
All right,
Duncan Spear,
I'm
guys.
letting-
We'll say goodbye later, but so we'll drop you out. And
Yeah, you
Yeah.
can hang on in the green room. Just
All
talk, you talk to yourself, because you can't actually talk amongst yourselves. So we'll say, there you go. Chris, it's fun. I mean, I'm really looking forward to the trip. I was looking forward to doing the show because it's something different, and we get a lot of people on, and it's always kind of weird and fun. And
well, yeah, and I want to say, obviously we'd love to see as many of you as we can on the trip.
we'd love to see all of you. There
all
are
of you.
89 people. I want all of you on the bus.
Absolutely. But, we also hope that you enjoyed this kind of something new for History Happy Hour. We do books every week, but if you like the idea of maybe just having a conversation about one particular battle or historical topic or something like that, just let us know, send us an email, and we might do this from time to time, just to kind of keep a conversation going.
Yeah, we're always looking for ways to kind of break it up and do some different stuff, and not necessarily have to read a 600-page book each week. I don't know. That's in no way.
Pick battles with short histories.
That's in no way a factor, right? But we'll be back to doing an author next week, and I'm busily trying to bring it up here, Chris. But we are going to be talking with John Foote, who's the author of Blood and Power: The Rise and Fall of Italian Fascism. So it's a book about politics and war, and I'm sure that some guy named Mussolini will make an appearance in there. What always surprises me about Mussolini and fascism in Italy is that he predates Hitler. Hitler's not doing anything when Mussolini's already Il Duce.
And all these other tyrants, Hitler, Franco, they all hold up Mussolini as the example that they want to be. So.
And fascism is literally that was their movement. I mean, that is what they called it. It was not a pejorative word at that point, and it comes from the Latin with the fasces, the bundles that the tribunes used to carry as a sign of their power. So, I think looking forward to that.
Yeah, and I think we should know more about Italy and Italy's war than we do, and we should pay a little bit more attention. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to that as well.
So check that out. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today, and we will see you soon.
Stay safe, everyone. Thanks.